Hey everyone! Today's video is a DIY craft and hair idea inspired by the new season of the History Channel show Vikings. I noticed that among some of Catherine Winnick's costume pictures on Instagram that the stylists were incorporating some really fun headpieces, so I thought why not build one of my own. For this project you will need a pair of scissors, a glue gun and glue sticks, optional is a needle and thread. You'll need some embellished buttons for a centerpiece, decorative or depending on your preference plain ribbon, embroidery thread or perhaps a thin yarn, along with at least one piece of felt. Necessary wire tools include a nylon jaw pliers, wire cutters, and craft wire in any color in 20 gauge. And again, depending on your preference, you'll need a pair of either small or large hair combs. You'll also need a measuring tape. I held mine up to my head as though it were a tiara, and I did this off camera. That space measured 15 inches. Obviously, it may be different for you, but don't worry, you won't have to match me here in order to do this project. I had a couple different kinds of ribbon, but settled on this green gold brocade since it sort of gave off a medieval feel, and of course I cut it to my own exact head width. Moving along, I used a few pins to secure my ribbon onto the felt. My intention here is to use this material as backing that'll add some weight to my headdress. Unfortunately, the felt I had on hand didn't measure 15 inches across, so I ended up having to cut 2 pieces, but all things considered, it wasn't really a big deal. Next, I unspooled a little over 16 inches of the 20 gauge wire and I used the nylon jaw pliers to smooth out any kinks. I decided to use 2 pieces, although I'm confident one would have been okay. Having turned on my hot glue gun, I then began to secure the wire horizontally onto my 2 pieces of felt. This was actually a little harder than I had first envisioned when planning the project, and that's because I really needed to hold it down to the material as I did this, while actively avoiding touching the glue. I will say that even though I'm pretty accustomed to burns as a hairstylist, hot glue gun burns suck just as much as curling irons, so be careful. Once both of the wires were in place, I snipped off some of the excess with my wire cutters, and then laid a third strip of glue down the center of my felt piece and rolled my ribbon over it. At this stage, the felt looked pretty sloppy, so I did go in and cut some of it back, that way it wouldn't stick out or show. At this stage, I was ready for the gold buttons. I laid them out in the pattern I thought was most flattering first by placing the 3 larger ones in the center and the 4 smaller ones on the outside. I kind of like to see where I'm going before I begin, so this step just helps me to visualize before committing to a design. Again, I cut another piece of wire, although this time I used my eyes to measure it. Obviously, it didn't need to be the full 15 inches, but I always give myself room for some error, so I guess this was somewhere between 12 and 13 inches. I started on one end of the wire by wrapping my copper-colored embroidery thread around it as a covering. This particular thread is relatively stiff, and I'd venture to guess that it's probably got some sort of small wire down the center of it too, because it held its shape with little to no trouble. If you weren't able to find a similar material, you could always use a thick twine or a rigid ribbon, preferably one with a wire, just so you wouldn't have to worry about it unraveling. One of the things you'll have to sort out on your own are the measurements between whatever buttons or jewels you choose. I wanted mine to appear evenly spaced with an inch of copper thread between them. That was easy to do for my smaller buttons, but the larger ones took up more space, so that meant that I needed to wrap 2 inches of thread between those. So as you've probably already guessed, this part of the project may involve various adjustments depending on your own personal embellishments. When it came to securing my buttons to the ribbon fastener, I chose to sew and I selected a clear nylon thread and a regular needle. I'm not the most awesome seamstress, so I thought a see-through thread would be just the thing in case I made clumsy stitches. I suppose I could have continued with the hot glue here too, but I was worried it wouldn't look as tidy. And one of the last steps involves bending the whole thing into a half-circle shape before attaching hair combs to either end. Since the show hasn't premiered yet, I haven't gotten a great look at the newer hair designs, so the idea I'm presenting here is only loosely inspired by one of Catherine Winnick's Instagram photos, which I'll link in the description. I started by parting my hair down the center and then using my fingers to draw a U-shaped divide that extended from temple to temple. For now, I'm bunning it and clipping it to the top of my head. With that in place, I used a rat tail comb to part a vertical section on my left side that starts at the top of the U-shape and goes slightly below the ear. This new parting will act as one of the 3 typical Lagertha panels, and like with many of her hairstyles, I decided to use this hair to make a horizontal mini French braid. Obviously, this motion needs to be repeated on the right side as well, and it's the exact same steps as on the left. If you're in need of a braiding refresher, I'll have a link to my extensive braid dictionary video in the underbar as a reference. Having now finished the sides, I let down the top portion of hair. I began my sectioning here by dragging the comb from the center parting down to my temple, and I'll venture to guess that this was just about 2 inches wide from line to line. This then gets divided again into 2 even portions, and these will be the first 2 of what should eventually be 4 knot braids. The stitch for this is incredibly simple and not very different from tying a shoelace or a ribbon around a gift. There are 2 strands and they get tied together in a simple square knot over and over again. I know that some of you might worry about the takedown, but I've found that when I've done these knots loosely, it's not really been a problem. However, if you're concerned about tangles, you can always substitute these with a number of different 2-strand braids like the rope or fishtail. With my 4 front braids now secured, I gathered the remaining hair in that horseshoe section and pulled it up and separated a small band of hair at the crown. Again, I split this into 2, and here you can see that I'm working on the right side first. All I'm doing is making a regular 3-strand braid to the ends of my hair before holding that center strand down and pushing the other 2 up. This is called a slide-up braid, and if you need a more detailed explanation or a refresher, you can refer to my Braidtionary video. There are really only 2 more partings to make, and each of them are done horizontally by dividing thin sheets of hair off the sides of that larger mass in the middle. Once again, I chose to make knot braids, although thinking back on it, it could have been fun to change up the pattern here just a bit. As I said earlier, this isn't an exact copy of anything in particular, so I didn't feel super worried that I was getting anything wrong. Now you can always choose to tease the center or just pull it back like I did. I found that brushing it out first and then hairspraying and then combing it down was the perfect order in terms of giving me a relatively smooth base. Obviously, you may have to change that order or design to fit your own style and hair type, but this is definitely the easiest part of the style thus far. And because my hair is super fine, I only needed to utilize 2 bobby pins to complete this step. In the photo I referenced earlier, the one on Catherine Winnick's profile, I noticed that her braids and hair were pulled up and over the headdress, so that's what I decided to shoot for myself. I started by placing my Viking tiara around that pushed back center. The cool thing about having added wire between ribbon and felt is the fact that you can bend it to fit your head however you need to, and when I had to, it wasn't hard to move and adjust as I pinned. With that said, the only downside to knot braids, at least in my opinion, is that they eat up tons of length. So when I pulled the 4 front ones backwards between the ends of the crown, I didn't really have very much left over to work with. But since I was sort of winging this look, I ended up feeling like that was okay, and that the ends kind of looked like a strange and complicated braid in their own right. So yay, that was cool. I did want something to hang down my back though, so when it came to the French braids along the sides of my head, I resisted the urge to use them to form a bun, and instead draped and pinned them between the slide-up braids and the tails from the 6 knot braids. And with that, the look was complete. I hope you all enjoyed the ideas in this video. I'm so incredibly excited to see the new season and all the beautiful hair, makeup, and costume ideas that it'll yield. And of course the storylines. Looking forward to seeing more of Ragnar's grown sons. But anyway, I digress. Happy cosplay, and until next time, have fun and keep braiding. Bye!